John, welcome to the program here. We spoke with your opponent just before this. I asked him the same question to begin with. When I ask you, how would you tell Republican voters you are different from Craig Goldman?
So State Representative Goldman rightly points out that this is my first time seeking public office, and so I don't have a record to run on, but what I can say is I'm an outside business person who's concerned with the way things are running in DC as well as in Austin. Whereas State Representative Goldman clearly does have a voting record and has been part of the leadership team under the current House Speaker Dade Phelan. So I would suggest that if somebody is interested in common sense outsider who's an America First type candidate and will stick to core conservative values, I would be in that lane, whereas Mr. Goldman would represent more the traditional Bush wing of the party, and like I said, has been part of the leadership team down in Austin now.
In the primary, it was a 5-candidate race.
Right.
Goldman got 44%, you got 26%. That's a big gap there. How do you plan to make that up in the runoff?
Well, if you looked at the other 3 candidates, and we had a number of forums that we went to where it was the 4 of us, Mr. Goldman opted not to participate. The other 3 candidates were running on kind of similar platforms, America First values, shutting down the border, rectifying our energy situation, kind of an end to career politicians. And so I would suggest that the people who voted for the other 3 candidates would be more apt to see me as their viable candidate to represent them.
How much will this race cost, you figure?
Ooh. Well, the price can vary greatly. I know to date, I think we've spent about $300,000, whereas I know Mr. Goldman has spent considerably more, and that doesn't factor into the general election. So I would estimate that running through the tape is going to be well north of $1 million.
How do you overcome that deficit, though? Getting the supporters for the other candidates who got even less than you to vote for you is one thing, but that's a big deficit to make up at the end of the day.
Well, true, but if you think about it, Mr. Goldman's been known to people, at least in his HD district, for over 10 years now. And he spent as much money as he did, and there were outside PACs out of Las Vegas that weighed in heavily into the race in his favor also, and he only garnered 44% of the vote. So what I would say is that we've built a real grassroots army. We've really tried to visit with the precinct chairs and get involved with the local clubs. And as a result of that, we have well over 200 volunteers who are out walking and volunteering for us every day. And so that's how I've been able to kind of get my message out and get to touch all the voters in the district.
John, you suggested the race for Congress comes down to one issue, and that's whether Republicans agree with the vote to impeach Ken Paxton. That's something your opponent voted for. He voted to impeach Ken Paxton in the House of Representatives. Well, why should that be a deciding factor, though, in a congressional race?
Sure. And I understand, and I've been friends with Ken for over 20 years, so I don't want to make it sound like it's an issue because of a personal vendetta. But to me, it's indicative more of the collaboration of the House leadership in Austin with the Democrats, because it wasn't just the Austin Democrats that voted for the impeachment. The House leadership actually went to Merrick Garland's Department of Justice and hired 2 U.S. attorneys to lead the investigation. So I would say that if people are kind of more interested in kind of go along to get along to break up the partisanship that's currently there, he would be more indicative of that choice, whereas I'm somebody who's more about holding firm and kind of pushing back against this constant erosion of our values and this reckless deficit spending.
Your opponent called out your voting record as a public record people may not realize and said you hadn't voted from 2000 to 2019. That's a 20-year deficit there.
Well,
why not?
Actually, I have. My last name has an apostrophe in it, and so prior to leaving the country, I don't know if they had me with the apostrophe or whatever, but it didn't pick up when I came back and re-registered. There was, however, about a 4.5-year period where I was out of the country. My wife had brain cancer, and I was in effect a single parent. And so in my campaign, I say it's God, family, country, and it's in that order. So that is correct. I did miss the 2016 and 2018 elections.
But you voted from 2000 to 2016?
I voted for George W. Bush both times. I voted for Mitt Romney. I voted for Senator John McCain. I did.
You said there's a civil war in the Republican Party of Texas. You called it the America First Paxton side versus the establishment. Paxton clearly supported you, but Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick support your opponent, Craig Goldman. I wouldn't call them necessarily Bush Republicans in the establishment, though.
No. And honestly, being a first-time candidate, I will say that it's kind of eye-opening sometimes finding out how the endorsement process works. I mean, for Ken, in fact, I'm the only federal race that he endorsed in. For Governor Abbott, I think he's tended to be more of a single subject kind of endorsement issue, and I think Mr. Goldman has previously, met with his expectations there. For the Lieutenant Governor, frankly, I'm a little perplexed about that one, but he's also endorsed Congressman Gonzalez down in San Antonio too, who's been censored by the Republican Party, so I'm not sure what the thought process was there.
What do you make of, because Abbott endorsed Tony Gonzalez, what do you make of that?
Well, again, I think that there are people who want to see that kind of the power structure is maintained and are not happy with the grassroots finding their voice and demanding that actually they be heard. Because I think right now there is a sentiment right now that the voters have been clear. They've been electing people who've been running as if they were Ronald Reagan when they're campaigning, but then when they get into office, they vote as if they're Nancy Pelosi.
In Congress this week, there's going to be a vote to oust the Republican Speaker, Mike Johnson. Some Republicans clearly upset that he worked with Democrats to pass the aid bill, the foreign aid bill for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. If you were in Congress right now, John, how would you vote?
So, candidly speaking, he made a very public promise that he would close the borders before considering aid to Ukraine. There's also the Hastert rule that says that when the majority of the majority are against an issue, it doesn't get brought to the House floor. On top of that, that aid package also had over $3 billion to expedite people being brought into the country from the Middle East. And I frankly can't find any justification for that.
So you wouldn't vote to keep him? You'd vote to oust him?
I actually, as things stand right now, that's the direction I would lean, yes.
Let's talk about Ukraine for a moment. You suggested, I believe I read, that you don't support sending any more money to Ukraine. Is that the case?
Right. Yes.
Tell me why.
Well, let's just speak about the practical matter first versus even kind of what the ideological issues are. But the practical matter is Ukraine had a peace deal on the table almost 2 years ago, which would have put them in a much better situation where they are now. And
but they would have to cede land in that peace deal.
They're
ceding, part of the country,
the
right?
reality is they're ceding land regardless, and over 500,000 people additionally died as a result of the continued fighting. And there can be a case made that there are people in the eastern portion of Ukraine who are ethnically and Russian-speaking people that were being attacked by paramilitary organizations from the western part of Ukraine. So it's a complex issue. My whole thing is put an end to hostilities right now. And if I think Vladimir Putin is not going to be willing to give up the land, and I don't see that there's any amount of money or any amount of weapons that are going to replace bodies in the field.
Do you support calls for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war?
No, I do not.
Why not?
I believe that Israel should have their own determination in how they protect their sovereignty of their country.
Well, you just said in the hostilities for Ukraine and Russia, but this one's a different case?
It is, to me, the situation in Israel is that they're being asked to negotiate a ceasefire with people who've pledged to eradicate them as a nation. From the river to the sea isn't a call for a Arab state within the nation of Israel. It's a call for the actual abolishment of Israel as a country.
What are your thoughts, John, on the pro-Palestinian protests we've seen at UT Austin, UT Dallas, University of Texas Arlington, and other places?
I think that right now the wealthy liberal donors are getting to see exactly what their Frankenstein monster looks like as DEI bears fruit. You have outside paid agitators, and I think that we ought to be conducting investigations to really get to the heart of that. Who is providing this money and why are they doing this? And then there's being students whose their passions are being misled, but they've been indoctrinated in the universities for multiple years now.
If elected, on what issues do you think you could work with Democrats?
Well, I mean, there are some issues that, candidly speaking, the public are generally in support of. For example, shutting down the border. The people, by and large, regardless of party affiliation. Now, that not be the same with the elected officials. Election integrity is also a very bipartisan issue. I know that it keeps getting brought up all the time. Signature verification, voter ID requirements, same-day, election day voting, that those are things that are suppression tactics. But if you actually take a look, when we had those things in place, there was greater voter participation. And actually, people, regardless of party affiliation, the majority support those kind of measures.
But neither of those are things that Democrats support, elected Democrats support.
Well, there's the key phrase, the elected.
Right, but you'd have to work with those elected Democrats if elected to Congress. Is there any issue that you could work with them on?
Well, right now, I think the greatest existential threats facing our country are the invasion at the border, inflation, which is due to our green climate change initiatives that we've had implemented, and the lack that we're not drilling and doing more of our fossil fuels, and then the government spending. And candidly, if there were people on the other side of the aisle that would be willing to address those matters the way the American public wants them addressed, party affiliation doesn't mean much to me anymore. In fact, I don't think this is a Republican versus Democrat anymore. I literally think that this is spiritual warfare for this country, and it boils down now to good versus evil.
So Democrats are evil?
No, I'm saying that certain positions that are being promoted by, regardless of Democrats or Republicans, for example, child gender modification surgery. I think people are going to look back in the future at this time, and they're not going to think favorably of the direction that we said was quote unquote affirmative care.
Let me hit one other issue that you've talked a lot about, even in this interview here. You've called for the border to be shut down completely with Mexico. How would that work exactly, though? Because Texas and Texas businesses rely a lot on trade down there. What does a shutdown physically look like, John?
Well, it would cause some temporary pain on both sides of the border, clearly. But at that point in time, I think you get everybody to the negotiating table when you show that you're serious. And look, we saw when President Trump implemented the Remain in Mexico policy and had that kind of resolve to put on tariffs on Mexico, that it actually brought about the desired drop-off in illegal immigrants crossing our border. The same tools are still available today.
John, thank you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much.